It has been an eventful morning for Maduro and a more than eventful 3 days. Just hours ago, as you can see on your screen now, he was taken by helicopter from a Brooklyn detention center where he and his wife were being held in separate solitary cells to Lower Manhattan. From there, he and his wife were loaded into an armored vehicle, a Bearcat, under heavy guard and driven by motorcade into the courthouse. Less than 72 hours before that, the authoritarian leader and his wife Cilia were at home in bed before being captured in a surprise U.S. military operation early Saturday morning. They are now facing narco-terrorism and drug charges, among others, and will enter a plea any moment now, which is why we are on the air. If convicted, they could face decades in prison. CBS News chief correspondent Matt Gutman is joining us now. He is live outside of the courtroom. Matt, what a day here. You've got dueling protests. I hear the voices behind you, and you've got this extraordinary shift in circumstances for the leader of a very significant South American country. What's the mood like where you are?
And one of the nations with the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Right behind us, and you did hear those chants, there are basically two opposing demonstrations happening here. One on my right is Venezuelans who support his detention and arraignment today, who believe that he should have been taken out of the country and deposed. On the other side, people who oppose U.S. intervention. And what you heard is those two sides kind of clashing. Now, just a second before we came on the air, NYPD moved in, sort of separating the two sides. I think to some degree that also encapsulates what's happening in the country. You might be able to see some of the press behind me, dozens of reporters there, dozens additionally all facing the court ahead of that arraignment, which is set to happen any moment now. We know opposing counsel are in court. Both the public defender for Maduro and his wife are there, and of course the prosecution will be there. We're not yet sure if Maduro has entered the courtroom, but that will happen. And Tony, he's expected to plead not guilty to the four charges against him, which include conspiracy for narco-terrorism, conspiracy to traffic cocaine into the United States, and various weapons charges. These are serious charges. You could face, and they both could face, decades in prison if convicted, but it is going to not be an easy conviction. There's some question about the validity of the evidence that the U.S. has accumulated against him, specifically as the alleged kingpin of a drug cartel. So not going to be necessarily an easy road. There is consensus, however, about the fact that almost every legal analyst that we have spoken to believe that he can get a fair trial here in the United States, Tony.
Hey, Matt, while we have you, I see the barricade behind you, and then behind you, additional barricades. We saw the armored vehicle earlier this morning, the heavy armed guard around Maduro as he was transferred from the helicopter to the courthouse. What are you seeing there and reporting, hearing about in terms of security today?
You can hear some of that security passing by us right now. Obviously, massive amounts of security right outside the courthouse here. And I think you probably saw that video, and people have been watching it all weekend long, of Maduro being flown in on a Department of Justice jet from somewhere in the Caribbean, of Maduro then choppered to Brooklyn or to New York to the DEA headquarters, shuffled in wearing that tracksuit and slides, and then very cordially greeting the DEA officials who might have had a hand in detaining him, saying Happy New Year and good night. And then, of course, this morning being flown from Brooklyn to Manhattan in that helicopter and taken off with all that security around him, then driven here in a Bearcat, one of those armored vehicles. So tremendous security and obviously an enormous amount of interest in this case, Tony.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. Criminal defense attorney Caroline Polisi is with me now. Caroline, thank you very much for being here. We just got word from inside the courtroom. We want to let our viewers know that Maduro and his wife have entered the room. This is courtroom 26A. You know what's going to happen there. What is the process for a day like today?
Yeah, so today is going to be largely procedural. I don't think we will get any bombshell news. The one thing I was looking for today, which we just realized, is that he has retained a private attorney. Previously, he had a court-appointed attorney. It looks like he's retained a pretty well-known a high-profile criminal defense attorney. He actually represented Julian Assange in his New York cases. But
Barry Pollock, right?
Yeah, that's right, Barry Pollock. And so it does seem as though, today will be largely procedural. He will be read the charges against him, those 4 conspiracy counts. He will be asked if he understands those charges, and then he'll enter a plea, likely of not guilty. Given the fact that he now is the retained attorney, I would expect we will see some very robust chest puffing in terms of arguments that they plan to make regarding the illegality of this prosecution.
Let's talk about that for a second, because the protests outside, they're waving signs saying, well, the ones that do not support the Trump administration's actions, there's cheers and celebrations. But on the other side, you have people saying this is an illegal act. That is the #1 criticism. What does the law say about that?
Yeah, it's complicated. There are legal scholars debating this ad infinitum, academically, sort of online, and you can read all of that. Bottom line, international law, yes, this likely did violate international law, but this is not without precedent. I want to make that clear. People are saying this is sort of a move out of the blue. 1989, almost 36 years to the day ago, George H.W. Bush extracted a rogue dictator in Panama, Manuel Noriega, and prosecuted him on American soil. All of the same issues were raised there, and people were crying afoul that this did run afoul of the law. Bill Barr had written a memo, an Office of Legal Counsel memo, previously, about 6 months prior to that, stating that under United States law, constitutionally, it's okay for the FBI to use military force to extract a rogue dictator, right? We don't recognize Maduro as the president of Venezuela. We say he is illegitimate, therefore he's not going to get sovereign immunity here. All of those arguments will be made in this case, and I expect the court will follow those precedents to maintain this prosecution.
There's so much in the balance here for the future of Venezuela, for American policy in the region, for Donald Trump politically and personally. But there's also a lot at stake right here in terms of the freedom of Maduro. What does he face if convicted of all of these charges laid out in this indictment, he and his wife?
Yeah, I mean, decades behind bars. If he gets convicted on all 4 counts, you're looking at 30, 40 years to life in prison. Wow. So these are serious charges. Narco-trafficking conspiracy carries a hefty sentence. Also, I would note, Tony, there is a forfeiture allegation here, right? Because so the conspiracy was not only for drug trafficking in and of itself, but to enrich, him personally, his family personally, and other top leaders in Venezuela. So there is a large amount of money at stake here that the government is wanting back.
Yeah. They're saying facilitating thousands of tons of cocaine into the country
per year,
running state-sponsored gangs, murders and kidnappings. Very, very serious stuff. Caroline, thank you very much. I want to go now to senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who joins us, I believe, from West Palm Beach. Ed, the politics here are very complicated. They move in a lot of different directions. And I think, oh no, he's at the White House. That's not West Palm Beach at all. A little bit colder. The politics here are moving in a lot of different directions. I understand as we speak, or sometime very soon, members of the Trump administration will be briefing some very upset members of Congress who did not have any kind of heads up about this operation in Venezuela. What do you know about that?
Tony, good to see you. Yes, the president got here back to the White House last night, so he is here today. We're not currently scheduled to see him in public during the course of today, but as you mentioned, senior administration officials, including the Secretary of State, the Defense Secretary, the CIA Director, are set to brief what's called the Gang of Eight, who are the most senior lawmakers who are supposed to be briefed on a regular basis in classified settings about sensitive national security matters, plus the top Republicans and Democrats on the House and Senate Armed Services and Foreign Relations committees. That won't happen until later this afternoon, early this evening, and we'll see, although it's a classified setting, to what extent the justifications are explained yet again, because there is still some confusion, not only here in Washington among policymakers, but around the world, as to what exactly the United States is up to now in Venezuela, and perhaps most recently now conveyed by the UN ambassador, Mike Waltz, speaking before a special meeting of the UN Security Council this morning, reiterating what Secretary Rubio said on Sunday on Face the Nation and in other places, that there is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation in furtherance of lawful indictments that have existed for decades. The United States arrested a narco-trafficker who's now going to stand trial in the United States. But that differs from what President Trump was telling reporters last night on his flight back here to Washington. He said repeatedly, "We're in charge," would not provide any specifics about how exactly that's being done, but continued his focus on securing and controlling the flow of Venezuela's oil supply and ensuring that American interests are represented chiefly there in that regard. And of course has also now expressed interest potentially in expanding military operations to other corners of the Western Hemisphere should leaders in those countries not adhere to U.S. values, most notably Colombia, saying it's run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the U.S., raising questions about Cuba, saying it's, quote, ready to fall, and that Cuban Americans will be very happy about it, and raising the prospects of possibly taking action inside Mexico because he blames Mexico's president for not doing more to combat the drug cartels there. So lots of confusion still. We'll see if those senior lawmakers emerge later this evening with answers to their questions, especially about what's next for the U.S. involvement in Venezuela.
Yeah, lawmakers and politicians around the world gathering to talk about this. But you put your finger on, I think, what is most important here, which is the significant political gap between the law enforcement action, that explanation for this move in Venezuela, and then the comments about running the country or dictating the next steps of the country to the installed leadership that's currently there. I know you'll be following that for us, Ed. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I want to bring in senior national security correspondent Charlie Daggett, who can cover the military side of this for us. Charlie, still offshore of Venezuela and in that region in the Caribbean is the largest gathering of soldiers and sailors in more than 50 years, as I understand it. What is their mission there now?
Well, you know, I spoke to those military officials this morning. They really haven't budged even since the raid. So this huge military buildup that you and I have been following for the past few months, spearheaded by the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, the largest and most advanced aircraft carrier in the world. On board, it's bristling with F-18 fighter jets or F-35s in Puerto Rico. Those will remain. The F-35s took part in that raid in Venezuela. The Reaper drones are based in Puerto Rico as well. There are something like 11 warships that remain there and a whole slew of aircraft. And we're learning more about the raid itself. So even though the F-18 fighter jets, F-22s, F-35s were involved in sort of paving the way for these Delta Force agents to get in there, they still took fire. They were flying in at about 100 feet. So as they got closer to the Maduro compound, they faced firefights, and a handful of U.S. service members were injured. President Trump said one of them was pretty badly injured. A helicopter took fire, according to General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but it was flyable, and those pilots were able to get that helicopter back out. Now, in addition to that, maybe dozens of Venezuelans were killed in the raid. But interestingly, Cuba announced that 32 of its citizens, describing them as members of the armed forces and intelligence services, were killed during that raid, which sort of underlines the level of cooperation between Cuba and Venezuela, both overt and covert, that we're not exactly sure where these individuals were stationed because there were a couple of military bases that were hit in addition to the compound, but we can assume that they were also part of Maduro's inner circle and security teams.
All right, Charlie, thank you very much. I just got a note here from our producer in the courthouse. I want to let our viewers know that 12:02 p.m., the judge entered the courtroom and all rose. The judge said, it is my job and my intent to ensure that this is a fair trial and a fair proceeding. So we will keep following what goes on in that courtroom. No cameras allowed in, but we are getting reports from the courthouse, and we'll let you know. Meanwhile, Lilia Luciano is on the Colombia-Venezuela border. They are not letting reporters into the country, as I understand it. Lilia, what are you witnessing there?
That's right, Tony. This is a very dynamic border. Right now, what you're seeing are cars that are coming from Venezuela directly here. I kind of want to set the scene on what's happening in Venezuela. Right now, there is some semblance of stability. There is calm. It seems like there is unity among the people who are in power. But I am getting messages from people in Venezuela who say that the colectivos, the urban gangs who are loyal to the regime, are keeping that order by surveilling, by stopping people in checkpoints on the road, by checking people's social media, by asking people whether or not they supported the strike. So the regime is still very much felt. I want to remind you that Maduro was the head of the regime, but his closest circle of power is still there. The Minister of Defense, who controls the armed forces, is still there. You also have Diosdado Cabello, who has been historically Maduro's henchman, the person who controls those informal gangs or groups, who maintains the fear and who persecutes the people who express their free speech, and the people who, as we saw when we were there as the only network team on the ground covering the election, the people who rose up, the people who protested, the people who supported because they voted for the opposition, and Maduro held on to power, breaking every promise that the regime had made to the U.S. And that, of course, brings us to here. All of those people are still repressed. They are waiting for some kind of negotiation to lead to some kind of democracy. But the person in power, of course, is the vice president. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you off here. I want to let our viewers know that we just saw that Maduro in court said, "I am an innocent man. I'm not guilty. I'm a decent man." That's a direct quote. I want to go back to CBS News chief correspondent Matt Gutman, who's at the federal courthouse. Matt, this sounds like a dramatic moment here. We've got notes from our producer inside. Maduro taking notes, staring at his paperwork. Then this dramatic moment, he rises and addresses the courthouse. What did he say? What was the reaction?
I mean, it was very interesting and indeed a dramatic moment in court, Tony. Initially, the judge said, "Are you Nicolás Maduro?" To which he answered, "I'm the president of Venezuela. I was captured at my home." And the judge cut him off and said, "I just need to know your name." It continues with Maduro then waiving his right to the judge reading the indictment. The judge read him his rights, and Maduro said, "I didn't know these rights. Your honors inform me of them now." And then, as you said, he said, it didn't appear to actually enter a plea, and we're still trying to verify if that is the case. He said, "I am innocent. I'm not guilty. I'm a decent man. I'm still president of my country." His wife also entered a plea of not guilty, or her attorney did on her behalf. And there's still this conversation happening right now, Tony, about whether he's seen the indictment, whether he knows what's in it, and whether he has been informed of his rights. Again, this is just the initial proceeding in what could be a very long judicial proceeding with Maduro and his wife on these indictments, the first of very many. It does appear that he is entering a plea of not guilty, and this is still going on. The judge is just trying to say, hey, listen, we are here just to ensure that there is a fair trial. There will be more further on. You will have an opportunity to say your piece later on. But right now, we just need to know that you know your rights, that we know who you are, and that you enter a plea. Yeah. So this is ongoing right now, an incredibly dramatic moment in court, Tony.
Dramatic moment in court. You know, people are getting alerts on their phones. You can hear the protesters right by Matt there. And you can see for our viewers, we have a blog going on the right-hand side of your screen that shows what we know when we know it. Not guilty pleas from both Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. I want to bring in Caroline Polisi, again, our legal correspondent here, analyst, for more on what we just witnessed. Maduro appears to have begun to speak on his own behalf in a broader way about who he was and why he thinks this is unjust, and the judge cuts him off.
Yeah, that's about as dramatic as it gets for an initial appearance and an arraignment, and I'm not surprised that Judge Hellerstein cut him off. He's not allowed to speak in open court. His attorney will speak to him. He answers yes to who he is, and he enters the plea of not guilty. Now, it's interesting that he noted something to the effect of that he didn't understand either the charges against him or his rights.
Rights, yeah.
Because that's what an arraignment is. We need to know, part of the system is that you know what's happening. And I would be surprised if his attorney hadn't gone down. I mean, that's what you do as a defense attorney. You go over in detail what is being alleged. So I would think that they would stop the proceedings to make sure that he understands, because that's a pretty big part of the puzzle here.
Can we talk about the clothes that both Maduro and his wife are wearing here, just to set the scene so people can picture it? He's in orange sneakers. They're both in identical tan kind of jumpsuits. Yeah. Feet are shackled, orange short sleeves underneath, layered underneath. And their hands are unshackled so that when they rise, they can speak freely. Is this a typical wardrobe for this kind of appearance? Why not street clothes? Why not a suit?
Yeah, so oftentimes defense attorneys will fight really hard to get their clients in street clothes or in, a suit and tie, mostly for prejudicial effects in front of a jury. Obviously, there's no jury here today. Likely, his defense attorney hasn't had enough time to sort of, liaise with the prosecution. It's also a Bureau of Prisons issue in terms of the safety and security. They make that call. It's not the prosecutors necessarily. But I would expect that the defense attorneys will make immediate motions to get them in civilian clothing for all future appearances.
All right, Caroline, thank you very much. I want to go back to CBS News Chief Correspondent Matt Gutman, who is back outside the courthouse. Matt, what are you hearing?
You know, Caroline just made a really interesting point about the orange sneakers, the tan suit, and your question of why isn't he in civilian clothes, and how he's dressed right now and how his wife, Cilia Flores, is dressed is also a stark reminder, Tony, of where they are being housed. The Metropolitan Detention Center, one of the roughest, most notorious jails in the entire country. That's where Luigi Mangione is. That's where other very high-profile inmates have been, including Ghislaine Maxwell, Sean Diddy Combs, and others. And it is a notorious place because it's kept exceedingly cold. In fact, the main commodity there is socks because people wear 3 pairs of them at a time. The food, I'm told, is abysmal by lawyers who've been there many times. It's moldy. They say it's not fit for human consumption. So it's a far cry from the palaces he's used to in Caracas. And again, these proceedings are still going on. And there is an interesting note to be made here about the extreme care being made by the judge and the prosecution as well as the defense for due process here. They want to make sure that this is done fairly. They want to make sure that the Maduros have been read their rights, that they understand their Miranda rights, that they don't have to say anything. And it's a far cry from virtually no due process that anybody in the opposition would receive in Venezuela. People who are not entitled to due process, who are dumped into black sites run by the intelligence apparatuses there and by the police, and often never heard from again. So some very strong duality that we're seeing right here, right now.
It's remarkable and a really unbelievable shift in circumstances. You mentioned the lifestyle that he was living as the leader of Venezuela. He goes to bed in Venezuela Saturday night as that leader with that lifestyle, wakes up Monday morning in the hands of the DEA and is now in a downtown courthouse. Matt, I understand we have some footage of the protests going on around you. We can hear them. They're getting louder as more news comes out of the courthouse. What are you seeing on these signs? What are people saying?
There are dozens of people, actually probably hundreds of people out here, and I would say many dozens of LAPD trying to enforce the peace. So on one side, you have Venezuela Libertad, Venezuela liberty, freedom. And on the other side, no U.S. war in Venezuela, USA hands off Venezuela, no more bombing of Venezuela. There's something else, down with the fascists. Does not seem that the people who are opposed to Maduro having been snatched out of Caracas in the middle of the night, that many of them are actually from Venezuela or have any connection to it. I don't see Venezuelan flags on that side, and it does seem that everybody on the side that is supporting the judicial process right now, that supports him being arrested, they are all entirely Venezuelan. So an interesting juxtaposition between these two clashing sides. And again, I don't think we have seen anything beyond very mild pushing and some shouting at this point. But obviously the LAPD is keeping a very close eye on it right now.
Matt, you're in New York now. You've joined CBS News here on the East Coast. But I hear you. I understand. I want to bring in senior national. A little reminder for you there. I'll be saying good morning to people, not good evening, for a long time. But I want to bring in our senior national security correspondent, Charlie D'Agata, who's got more on the military situation. Charlie, we're all sort of holding our breath here because there's this huge difference between what the Trump administration is saying about the future of Venezuela and the resistance protest language you're hearing from the leadership of Venezuela. And that makes everybody a little bit worried that the military might have another mission here soon. What do you know?
Yeah, well, this is the reason for this forward military posture, the largest posture that has been seen there in decades, because the Trump administration has already warned that they are ready to strike Venezuela again, because we remember that Maduro may have left, but his regime is still very much intact. And there are a number of people within that regime that are still wanted by the United States, as Maduro was. So this maximum pressure is still there. and they will start pushing more pressure on this Venezuelan regime. But in addition to that, we've talked about the oil tankers. A number of oil tankers, according to open source intelligence, have actually left Venezuela, getting through that U.S. blockade. Again, not suggesting that this regime is cooperating with the U.S. authority in that region. As a matter of fact, we've learned that the U.S. military is tracking one of those cargo tankers and may be considering an interdiction. So this is all a very dynamic situation there. And the U.S. military, we call it strike packages. They had those targets in place. And when President Trump says we were ready to launch another wave, you can be sure that that strike package is still intact and those targets are still intact. And you certainly have a multitude of U.S. military assets if that option is taken.
Chilling reminder of the American power there in the region. Charlie, thank you very much. I want to go back to criminal defense attorney Caroline Polisi for more on what happens next, right? So we've got an arraignment. We have 2 not guilty pleas. We have the indictment read. How soon could this go to a jury? We're going to see evidence. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, saying all Americans should read the indictment.
Yeah.
When are people going to hear about the evidence?
They should read the indictment because it does sort of read like a novel. Very high level, I would note. Not a lot of meat. But this is going to take a while. So there are going to, I mean, this is not your average drug trafficking conspiracy. There are obviously the issues that you raised regarding the legality of the raid and the way in which he was brought on American soil. Those will eventually get into separate spheres. The ongoing occupation of Venezuela, essentially, the government is arguing, is sort of a byproduct of this DOJ operation with FBI to extract 2 indicted individuals. They're really focusing on that aspect of it to maintain the constitutionality of it, right? This is not an act of war because lawmakers are already sort of, up in arms over it. But that part will be separated pretty quickly. They will make motions regarding that. But again, the judge will likely follow this precedent that we have saying, regardless of how he was brought to American soil, that's not my job to pontificate on. And he has jurisdiction over him now, and then it will proceed like any other criminal case.
I'm going to ask maybe a dumb question, but I think one that will be on people's minds. Nicolás Maduro is not an unknown figure like a normal defendant might be. He's not an anonymous figure. There are years and years and years of high-quality journalism reporting. Human rights organizations have reported on that detail a regime that has been engaged in torture, starvation, the complete collapse of the economy, general misery, political violence, you name it. All that stuff is public record. That's why you see such a strong reaction from so many Venezuelans saying, we want this guy gone, and yesterday. Is that admissible in any regard into this court conversation? No.
No. One of the beauties of our criminal justice system is that you can't find somebody guilty of a crime based on their character. The rules of evidence famously do not let in other bad acts, we call it. I mean, there are loopholes. If it somehow relates to the offense conduct, maybe some of that could come in. But in general, no, you can't convict somebody just because they're a bad guy. Now, Matt was referencing whether or not he can get a fair trial in the United States. I do believe that he can. It will take a rigorous vetting process from prosecutors and defense attorneys. They'll go through a vigorous voir dire process. I'm sure you've covered them before. The Sean Combs case took days and days because you want to root out people that maybe have pre-existing prejudices or know a lot about the circumstances there such that they couldn't be fair and impartial.
Does that mean potentially there wouldn't be Venezuelans on the jury?
Potentially. I mean, you get a number of strikes just for cause and without cause. It depends. I would imagine that Maduro and his attorneys will have a jury consultant. There's a whole cottage industry out there in terms of what types of jurors they will want to pick. But I do believe that, just as Matt said, too, it makes you proud to be an American. He is being afforded every due process right that an American citizen would on this soil. And the criminal justice system sort of bends over backwards to make sure that that's in place. Both the prosecution and obviously the defense will want this to be a clean trial with no prejudice to it, because they want, if they get a conviction, they want it to be upheld on appeal.
Yeah, and a stark contrast between the way Americans in Venezuelan courts under Maduro have been treated, according to all the reporting on that. Let's bring our senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe back in. Ed, I know you're following the situation with the oil in Venezuela, obviously massive known reserves there. the White House suggesting that American companies are going to go in and get it. What do you know on that front?
Well, let me convey one other bit of information, Tony, we've just learned in the last few minutes. You may be wondering, where is the president in the midst of all of this? Obviously, the wheels of justice are turning up there in New York City. We're told by an aide who's working with him right now that he's in the Oval Office, monitoring events, but not necessarily watching television coverage. There isn't obviously anything to be watching from inside that courtroom, but he is aware of what's going on. Again, he's not scheduled to be seen publicly today, at least so far, and will leave much of the explaining to senior officials who are set to meet with senior lawmakers later. Oil, of course, is going to be most likely a big part of that conversation. To what extent is that what the U.S. is most concerned about now? How exactly is the U.S. going to assess the petroleum supply there in Venezuela? Remember, it's believed, or at least at one time, they had the largest known petroleum reserves in the world. The issue, though, is that so much of the infrastructure around it has been allowed to fall into disrepair over the course of the Chavez and Maduro governments. And so there is a desire by American firms and other international petroleum firms to get back into Venezuela and begin developing those fields again. But it will cost tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars over time to make that happen, to employ the correct people, and to then ultimately get the oil out. And so while there may be interest, and there have been reports that some business groups are already making plans to visit in the coming days or weeks, it could be several years until full development and extraction is capable.
Yeah, and then, of course, then if anything would happen, like lower gas prices here in the U.S., but we will be talking to Jill Schlesinger later on the Evening News about that. Ed, thank you very much. In our waning time, I want to go back to CBS News Chief Correspondent Matt Gutman from outside the federal courthouse. Matt, I understand this arraignment has wrapped up. How did it end?
Back up.
Matt, can you hear me? How did this end, this arraignment? The judge has given a date for another appearance?
Yeah, on March 17th, that's the next status date. You can hear the protesters, the demonstrators still going at it against the opposition here. And both at this point, both Flores, who is Nicolas Maduro's wife, and Nicolas Maduro have pleaded not guilty. Interestingly, they have also waived their right to a bail at this point so that they can properly address a bail issue at some point in the near future, hoping that they might be able to get released on bail. Now, something interesting just about the tone of these proceedings, Tony, it has been incredibly cordial and professional. The judge made pains to know that Maduro understood the interpretation. Maduro said it was satisfactory and good enough that I was able to take notes. And then he asked the judge, will I be able to keep my notes? And I don't want, other interference with them. I want them to be kept private. And the judge acceded to that request. Now they're talking about health and medical issues that the Maduros might face, that they might need some additional attention, and the judge is willing to hear that. Interestingly, we are now learning that Flores, Maduro's wife, Cilia Flores, may have fractured or had some severe bruising on her ribs, according to her attorney. And we saw that image earlier of Maduro being walked off the helicopter into that Bearcat armored vehicle, and it looked like he was limping. And there's some question about whether he was perhaps injured in some way during his capture in Venezuela. So those questions are being hammered out. Of course, the nuts and bolts, the most important part to know is that he has pleaded not guilty, as has his wife. The judge has set the next status hearing for March 17th, Tony.
March 17th, 11 a.m. We see on the right-hand side of the screen. We have a live picture up because we understand Maduro might be led out of the courtroom soon. That reference there from Matt about the medical attention is a reminder that we're talking about a 63-year-old and a 69-year-old in Cilia Flores. As we wait the video we think we're going to get here of Maduro, I want to go back to Lilia Luciano on the Colombia-Venezuelan border because she's got some reporting on what could happen next in Venezuela. The interim president, Delcy Rodriguez. Lilia, if you can hear me, who is she? And then you've got Maria Machado, the recent Nobel Peace Prize winner, opposition leader. What are her prospects for taking power back?
I'm so glad that you're asking that question, Tony. There is a kind of split screen happening in the minds of Venezuelans, both in Venezuela and outside right now. And people who I've talked to who are here in Colombia waiting to go back say, okay, without Maduro, the logical question would be that the election that happened in 2024 the person who won that election would rise to power. That's not Maria Corina Machado, and stay with me. The reason it's because the Maduro regime banned her from running. But her candidate, according to people in exile, according to people against the regime, should be the person who the U.S. should be propping up. The person who is the leader of the opposition is Maria Corina Machado. Instead, the Trump administration is negotiating at this moment with a person who was the number 2 to Maduro, the VP. Right now, what we know about Delcy Rodriguez is that she's telling people in Venezuela that the proper president is Maduro. She had to assume the role of the president because of what happened over the weekend, but she was his vice president. She has been an important figure of the regime for a long time. She has been Minister of Oil. She has been Minister of the Exterior. She has held important positions in the Assembly. She comes from a family. I mean, her father was known worldwide for abducting an American back in the 70s. This is a person who has been part of Chavismo, of socialism, of what has run Venezuela over the last nearly 30 years. And now she's the one who's having conversations with the Trump administration. She is, by the measure of the regime, potentially consider it a little bit more moderate. She's used to negotiating on matters of sanctions, of oil, and so perhaps she's somebody that the Trump administration could trust to follow through to a certain degree, to perhaps abide by those conditions that they had offered Maduro, according to Secretary Rubio and to Trump, and that he continued to reject. But does she have the kind of support? Can she unify the extremely polarized country that is Venezuela? That is a very big question, and she's going to need a lot of powerful allies in there and out in the United States to avoid a crisis that we would feel immediately here, especially on the issue of migration.
Yeah, there is so much at stake. Lilia, behind you, we see the armored vehicles and the guards. Are we looking into Venezuela there, or is Venezuela in front of you?
Well, we are looking into Colombia. Venezuela is here to my left. There is the bridge where the cars are coming in. So the cars you're seeing behind me are coming from Venezuela. These armored vehicles are here because Colombia is foreseeing that there could be that migration crisis I mentioned. Every time that the regime has gripped to power, every time that the economy has gotten worse, every time that they have persecuted en masse, like what happened what we saw during that last election, people leave Venezuela. They come to Colombia. But there's another reason why they're here, and this is something that the Minister of Defense explained to me. He said, look, if in fact the regime figures that are in power, specifically Delcy Rodriguez, follows what Trump is demanding, follows what the U.S. expects, that means that she's going to have to crack down on the illegal organized crime groups that are running drugs in Venezuela. If she does that, Colombia expects that they are going to start spilling over into Colombia. And Colombia's already existing problem of violence, of trafficking, of turf war is only going to get worse. So that's what these guys are truly preparing for here.
Yeah. Lilia, thank you very much. A lot to keep our eyes on, and we know you'll do it for us. I want to let our viewers know, once again, if you're just joining us, the ousted Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores have just pleaded not guilty to drug and weapons charges in a New York City federal courthouse. It comes less than 72 hours after they were captured in a surprise U.S. military raid in Caracas, capturing them in their bedroom as they tried to make their way into a steel room. The judge on this Monday announced that the next court appearance after those not guilty pleas will come on March 17th at 11 a.m. A lot of time before then. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight with me on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Tony DeCopel in New York.
Welcome back. You were just listening to a CBS News special report. We know ousted Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores were in a New York City federal courthouse earlier today, and they pleaded not guilty to drugs and weapons charges. A lot of news coming out of all of this. So right now I want to bring in CBS News senior coordinating producer for the Crime and Public Safety Unit, Anna Schechter. Anna, thank you so much for your time. Can you walk us through what happened in court?
Absolutely, Muga. What an extraordinary half hour we have been reading about from our producer there. So Maduro and his wife entered. Their feet were shackled. Their hands were unshackled. Maduro shook hands with his attorney. and they essentially began these proceedings. The judge took the lead and read the charges out for Maduro. That's narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine conspiracy, and then 2 weapons-related charges, having machine guns and destructive devices and conspiracy to attain them. Now, I want to note that both Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, had headphones on. So a translation live was coming into his ear. And so he then spoke in Spanish in a dramatic moment, saying, "I am innocent. I am a decent man," and this is highly unusual. I have covered a lot of cases down at 500 Pearl Street with really big personalities, but this is a first. A dictator from another country plucked out of his palace and brought here to face these drug charges here in New York federal court. It's just extraordinary. And so he said that he understood the charges and he entered his plea not guilty. Next, they went to his wife, Cilia Flores, asked her the same questions, and they were looking at counts 2, 3, and 4. She said she understood them, and she entered her plea of not guilty, Mugo. So that's a very big moment. The next status hearing set for the 17th of March.
Okay, and I want to ask about what we saw out there. We had our correspondents out there, and we could see a lot of people, protesters on both sides. They were out there. We could see security out there as well, police officers. So I want to ask you about security. How has the city beefed up security around that courthouse for today's arraignment?
You've had a flood of NYPD, federal agents, all around that court area, as well as the Metropolitan Detention Center where they are being held in Brooklyn. This has been a massive coordination. We were reporting all weekend about this incredible transport, which took DEA agents, FBI agents, to transport him, landing down at Stewart International Airport, then choppering him to a helipad in New York. All of this takes massive resources. There's some great footage of him walking flanked by armed agents there to protect him because this is such a high-profile case. He was flown by helicopter to the Wall Street helipad down in Lower Manhattan and then taken by motorcade, driven in a bear claw, so an armored vehicle, and backed into the Sallyport at 500 Pearl Street, which is a heavily fortified entrance there. And this takes massive resources. And this is the biggest city police department in the country and really the world. And they work with counterterror, FBI. They're all teamed together, focused on this massive case, this big day, the arraignment down in federal court.
Yeah, big day indeed. Anna Schechter, thank you so much for your time. And Reed Cowan is joining me now to lead us through much more news of the day, and I'm sure this is the news of the day. You have much more to talk about.
The world is watching, not the least of which your elected representatives in Congress. So let's go live now to Capitol Hill and CBS News Congressional reporter Torian Small. Torian, top members of Congress expect to get a briefing today. We understand that a lot of people in Congress have questions about what's happening. Tell us what you know about a briefing expected in Congress.
Yeah, so we know that there will be members of relative committees, including Homeland Security, Foreign Affairs, to be briefed by these top Trump officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Likely, what we're expected to hear is clarification as to why they weren't given a heads up before this operation took place. Even some Republicans, like Senator Susan Collins of Maine, said she spoke with Rubio after the fact, and while she is supportive of the Trump administration taking action, she believes that Congress should have been notified beforehand. We also know later in the week there will be a war powers resolution set to hit the Senate floor for a vote. That's spearheaded by Senator Tim Kaine. He said that it's been clear that the Trump administration is willing to forego speaking with Congress before they take these drastic actions. So he's looking to draw the line and really define the powers that were vested in Congress over the Trump administration. Meanwhile, we have some Republicans, including leadership, that have been full-throated supporting of the president's actions so far. Senator Mike Lee of Utah put out a pretty interesting statement that I found instructive. He said that this was the inherent authority of the administration or of the president in order to act in the way that he did. So he, as well as other Republicans, lending their support behind the Trump administration. But we'll be keeping an eye on that meeting that you mentioned, Reed, that's set to happen around the 5 p.m. hour here on the Hill.
All right, and we also understand that Senator Tim Kaine on CBS This Morning had some things to say. Walk us through that. Maybe we can even listen to that and talk about it.
Yeah, again, he's just been outlining the fact that Congress has not been kept in the loop, and he believes that is a level of what he calls lawlessness. Take a listen to what he had to say.
They need to tell us why it's a smart thing to do. The U.S. invading another nation and knock over its leadership gives a green light to other dictators around the world like Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping to do the same. They need to explain what the purpose is. Is it narco-trafficking efforts, counter efforts? Is it oil? Is it regime change? Is it this bizarre Monroe Doctrine that says we can dominate all nations in the Americas?
Well, Democrats' opposition to this has not been understated, I should say. There's also still a small smattering of Republican criticism when it comes to this. Marjorie Taylor Greene is, of course, the congresswoman from Georgia who's actually exiting from the Hill. Today will be her last day as a lawmaker. She said when this attack was announced that this was not what MAGA voted for. She says that the president's actions so far, especially as it relates to foreign affairs, has not been in line with this constituency and what he campaigned on, which, just to quote the president, was no new wars. She says that's a complete reversal of what he stood for, Reed.
All right, Torian Small for us on Capitol Hill. Thank you so much, Torian. We've got new information about the U.S. military operation in Venezuela to take down Maduro. Venezuelan President Maduro and his wife captured and now facing justice, as we've been talking about, on U.S. soil. So new today, we're also learning about what came before: spy missions, drones. They even went in with blowtorches. All of that figured in to the mechanics of what happened over the weekend. So let's go live to CBS News' Eleanor Watson on that mission that the Trump administration has branded Operation Absolute Resolve. Eleanor, what new information have you found about what came up before the capture?
Well, Reed, this was a mission that took months of planning. Delta Forces, that elite special forces unit, planned for months based on a exact replica of Maduro's compound, built based on information provided by the CIA. They practiced for months until the raid was mission go ahead. Once that go ahead was given overnight Friday into Saturday, it was supported by about 150 aircraft that launched from 20 different bases across the Western Hemisphere. One of the helicopters carrying the commandos into the compound was hit. Several Americans were injured, none killed. They were able to get out with their helicopter and are in stable condition, averting a potential disaster. We know from U.S. officials that there are no U.S. troops on the ground inside Venezuela as of now, but there are about 15,000 U.S. forces built up in the region that have been there for several months as part of a pressure campaign against Maduro. And yet, despite that presence, according to the top military officer, General Dan Kane, those forces on Saturday in Maduro's bedroom were able to take him by surprise.
So you appropriately put our focus on the people who were the tip of the spear, the U.S. military members. Do you know about any injuries that may have happened during this?
Reed, several were injured. We're told they're in stable condition. They were able to get out. No one was killed. Other casualties we're learning about, the Venezuela Attorney General said several innocent Venezuelan civilians were killed, and Cuba has actually come out and said 32 Cubans who were in Venezuela as part of a government work were killed during the operation, which is an admission of how closely Cuba works with the Maduro regime. President Trump and Secretary Rubio said some Cubans were killed when they were bodyguards for Maduro, guarding him during that raid. And Secretary Rubio throughout the weekend has warned leaders in Havana to watch closely what's happening in Venezuela, potentially threatening expansion against other countries in the Western Hemisphere.
Well, also over the weekend, Eleanor, we heard from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He appeared on CBS just after word of this mission broke. He's very much been on the front of the messaging. Where is he today?
Well, Secretary Hegseth is down in Norfolk, Virginia for most of the day. He's visiting a recruiting station and is visiting shipyards. But later, as Torian talked about, he'll join Secretary Rubio and CIA Director John Radcliffe to brief some members of Congress about the operation. Some members of Congress who were alarmed that they didn't get a notification ahead of time. It's worth noting that the Secretary did start his day with an X post on Twitter saying that the Pentagon intends to take administrative action against Senator Mark Kelly, a Democratic senator from Arizona who's also a retired Navy captain. Take administrative action against him for a video he participated in last year reminding U.S. service members they can refuse illegal orders. The Pentagon intends to initiate proceedings that would potentially reduce his rank, which would lead to a reduction in pay. Senator Mark Kelly, in a statement, has said he intends to fight that action.
All right, Eleanor Watson, with all of those updates, thank you so much. Keeping the focus, though, on Venezuela right now. You know, you say Venezuela these days, and the word you're going to hear over and over is this: oil. The U.S. capture comes as President Donald Trump highlights Venezuela as being one of the richest crude oil reserves in the world. Speaking to reporters after Maduro's capture, President Trump said the U.S. is in charge now and will rebuild Venezuela's oil infrastructure. But there's a lot to talk about where this is concerned. Let's go live to Ed Hurst. He's the energy fellow at University of Houston. Ed, I come from oil and gas territory in Utah's Uinta Basin, northeastern Utah. We know that Houston is a major, major voice in how oil is produced and brought out of the ground, not only in the United States, but elsewhere. We also know that some of America's adversaries see that prime real estate of Venezuela, and this could affect things on a geopolitical sort of table. What do you know about what would have to happen to get Venezuela producing oil in a way that would benefit the United States and other people?
Well, Venezuela produces about 1.5 million barrels a day, uses about 1 million for internal uses. That's down from 3.5 million barrels a day 55, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Exports about 500,000 barrels a day. A little bit goes to Cuba. Most of it goes to China. And China's been financially supporting the Venezuelan oil patch. It's going to take years and billions of dollars of reinvestment to bring the Venezuelan oil machine back online. It's been 25 years where the revenues have been diverted to first the Chavez regime and then the Maduro regime. Anybody going in there is going to have to staff up, make sure there's fabrication, all sorts of manufacturing facilities, professionals brought in to rebuild the industry. And nobody's really certain of how that's going to work. The rule of law has been the rule of Maduro, and the Trump administration has simply replaced the president with the same regime, the same staffing, the same people. Chevron is already there, does about 150,000 barrels a day, and that's on a production sharing arrangement. Chevron is compensated for its investment by taking a small share of what is produced. The other companies, ExxonMobil may take a look at it, but they've had their assets expropriated twice. ConocoPhillips, the same sort of story. Year in, year out, these majors in the U.S. have gone to other countries only to have their assets expropriated when things get to be too lucrative.
Well, and when we look at oil supply chains, we know that that has direct trickle down for the American consumer. What about the people who are at the pump, and how could oil prices be affected in Main Street USA settings?
It's not going to have any impact. Certainly in the old days, we used to import a lot of the heavy oil from Venezuela and refine it on the Gulf Coast. Citgo, which was recently a subsidiary of PDVSA, Venezuela state oil company, was geared to refine that crude. But now we've replaced the heavy crudes that used to come from Venezuela and from Mexico with about 4 million barrels a day of heavy crude that comes from Canada, with occasional tankers of heavy crude from Saudi Arabia to top up the refineries, if you will. Venezuela produces exports 0.5% of the global oil market. And we know the president met with MBS of Saudi Arabia about 10 weeks ago. And Clearly, Venezuela was on the agenda. The Saudis can replace any oil that's lost from Venezuela. The Saudis have 2 million barrels a day of spare producing capacity.
All right, Ed Hurs, we appreciate the conversation. Thank you so very much. We have continuing coverage right here on CBS News 24/7. Nicolás Maduro arraigned in that courtroom right now, and we are still awaiting for his exit from the courtroom to see if we will get a glimpse of him. We understand that these cars are pulling away from that court. We do believe that the vehicle you're looking at looks to be heavily armored and heavily accompanied by other guards, carries the ousted dictator Nicolás Maduro. Much more on CBS News 24/7.
Go to the ends of the earth.
We'll hit the heights.
A great adventure together.
And reach for the stars.
Star power. I like it.
So cool.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Something that's undeniable.
With mindfulness. Innovative.
Magical.
It's like being a child.
And truly original reporting.
How'd you do your research?
I tell a good story.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Do you believe this case could be solved?
Yes, I do.
What is your emergency?
I accidentally shot my wife.
Do you think it was accidental? I guess that's the million-dollar question.
It's not a violent crash.
No.
Whoa.
There's our connection.
Lady down. I knew this was going to happen.
Did this look like an accident or something else? Something entirely different?
I never would have guessed how this ended.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Watch now.
Here we go.
The ultimate tradition continues.
60 Minutes is here right now.
America's #1 news program is a free streaming channel. It's time for 60 Minutes everywhere you watch.
I'm Major Garrett in Washington, inviting you to the Takeout. Politics, policy, people, and pop culture served up weeknights. What's on the menu? Plenty. The day's happenings with curiosity, informality, and humor. It's serious discussion, but we do not take ourselves too seriously. Who was a better speaker, Mike Johnson or you? Oh, come on. Join me on the Takeout. Streaming right here on CBS News 24/7.
It was almost like being face-to-face with the devil.
48 Hours reports.
I fought and fought.
911, what is your emergency?
She disappeared off the face of the earth.
Stream 48 Hours 24/7.
Money Watch is your no-nonsense guide to taking control of your finances, where I offer practical, real-world advice with no jargon and no judgment. I'm Jill Schlesinger. Listen to Money Watch wherever you get your podcasts.
You both had talked about going on Survivor together.
Right. A Survivor contestant believes his sister was murdered.
I'm sorry that I couldn't protect you.
And is determined to be her voice.
This is her speaking to everyone saying, don't let this happen to you.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
It could be the greatest turnaround in college football history.
What is the magic here?
The undefeated Big Ten champs, Indiana Hoosiers.
Go behind the scenes of one of TV's most watched true crime series with the 48 Hours Postmortem Podcast. Follow and listen to 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to CBS News 24/7, where we continue breaking news coverage. Right now, you are looking at a helicopter shot where we expect in moments ahead to see the armored vehicle carrying ousted Venezuelan president and widely thought to be a dictator, Nicolás Maduro. He has left the courtroom after his arraignment and now will be taken back to custody to await what is next for him. Today in court, we heard him say not guilty. That was the plea from the ousted Venezuelan leader. Also, the same echo from his wife, Cilia Flores. A very dramatic arraignment playing out in that New York City courtroom last hour. They did it through a translator. This comes after a top secret U.S. military operation over the weekend caught the man widely thought once again to be a dictator. He is now out of power, and the person who was second in command is now in charge, the vice president there, at least for now, as President Trump says to the American media, we, the United States, are running things in Venezuela. So let's run over the charges right now. Maduro faces charges of narco-terrorism conspiracy and conspiracy to import cocaine and weapons. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman is live outside that courthouse in New York City. Katrina, you were inside the room where Maduro stood for his arraignment. Tell us your impressions and what you saw.
So Maduro was in court with his wife, Cilia Flores. He was very vocal, actually. When the judge first asked him to stand up and identify himself, Maduro launched into a speech in Spanish. The judge ultimately said he just wanted to make sure that this was, in fact, Maduro. But we did get a couple lines of what he said. He said, "I was captured at my home in Caracas, Venezuela. And that he ultimately said this was the first time he was seeing his indictment, but he wanted to read it personally on his own, not in that courtroom. They are also both not seeking to get out of detention at this time. That's something that they might revisit later. He was taking copious notes, though. Each of them had headphones on because there was a translator in their ear translating everything that was going on in that room. He looked very serious, maybe a bit frustrated at times to even be there at all, but it was a very respectful exchange between Maduro and the judge, Hallerstein, who has presided over many big matters, including some involving President Donald Trump.
And just to sort of step back, we are hearing some of the protesters outside that courtroom, like we've heard the last hour with our correspondents there. And then just a moment ago, you saw that image, that video of a freeway. That is the road that we expect Maduro will be taking as he makes his way back to behind bars. Now, we do know he has a defense strategy. We start to get a sense of what cards his defense lawyers will play. He has indeed lawyered up. What do you know about his attorneys?
So we know his attorney is Barry Pollock. He is a very experienced trial lawyer. He has just jumped on this case. One thing he did make clear in court is that they plan to challenge the legality of the arrest. That's something that we expected. If you look at case precedent here, it's very unlikely that they will win on that matter, but they are absolutely planning to raise it. They also asked the judge to waive his speedy trial right until March. That's when we're going to have another hearing at this courthouse, a check-in. They say they want to first deal with the voluminous discovery here and that there will be significant motions filed. I think another one that we will very likely see is saying that as a head of state that he should have immunity. So it will be a very complicated case, and he does now have this counsel.
All right, March 17th, the next time we will see a hearing on this. Katrina Kaufman, thank you so much. So let's go even deeper. Let's go to CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi. Caroline, always good to talk to you. I love your expertise. Your take on what you've read so far and what happened in the courtroom today.
Yeah, not too surprising, Reed. I think what I was looking for was whether or not Maduro was going to have lined up a retained attorney. We knew he likely, obviously, would have a court-appointed attorney if he needed to, but he does have this great criminal defense attorney, very high profile, represented Julian Assange in the WikiLeaks matter in New York, so he knows what he's doing. And just as Katrina was saying there, everything that I expected happened today, which is that his defense attorneys noted that they will be making really every anticipated argument regarding his extraction from Venezuela, that it was illegal, that it was in violation of international law, that it was in violation of national law, and that he should be granted sovereign immunity because he was the president of Venezuela. Now, as Katrina also alluded to, there is precedent for those arguments. It's very similar to the Manuel Noriega case back in 1989 when George H.W. Bush extracted him from Panama. We noted then that we saw him as a rogue dictator. We didn't believe he was a legitimate head of state. Therefore, the court said, regardless of how he got on United States soil, they would proceed with the prosecution and that he doesn't get sovereign immunity.
We can contrast what is happening with the prosecution, I think, with what happened in the days and weeks leading up with the military operation. A great deal of preparation, a great deal of planning. They knew exactly how this would go from the very beginning. On the prosecution side, where the legal side is concerned, do you feel like there has been work leading up to this that could mirror what happened in Venezuela with the military, some preparation here?
Oh, absolutely. And Marco Rubio made it abundantly clear. You know, this was a DOJ operation that was aided by the FBI and special forces, because this was an extraction of 2 indicted individuals. Remember, Reed, this is a superseding indictment. This indictment against Maduro has been out there since 2020, so he's been under indictment for 5 years. And that's really the argument that the administration is making for why this was not an act of war. The fact that there is sort of no one in charge of Venezuela now is just kind of like a byproduct of this extraction. And so that's sort of the legal hook here for why the administration feels that it did not violate the Constitution and or international law by going and getting him.
Were you struck, as somebody who knows the law, that there was no push for bail?
No, I thought that was a really good move on the part of the defense attorney. He's going to gain a lot of credibility with the judge, because it would have been a ridiculous motion to make. You know, under the Bail Reform Act, the 2 factors that you have to decide are flight risk and risk to the community. He's obviously a flight risk, Reed. So there's no chance he was going to make bail, although they did say it was without prejudice. They may put together a package in the future, but he's not making bail. He's going to be in the Metropolitan Detention Center until his trial.
All right, Caroline Polisi, fascinating always to talk to you. Thank you so much for that, watching this case so closely, as you will be, we know, for the months ahead. You know, there's a lot of reaction on Capitol Hill to what happened over the weekend in Venezuela. You heard Caroline talking a little bit about some of the legal moves and why at least members of the Trump administration felt like, given some of the legal precedent, some of the legal posturing, they did not need to involve Congress. We're going to look at that from a congressional lens when we come back on CBS News 24/7.
Go to the ends of the earth.
We'll hit the heights.
A great adventure together.
And reach for the stars.
Star power. I like it.
So cool.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Something that's undeniable.
With mindfulness.
Innovative.
Magical.
It's like being a child.
And truly original reporting.
How'd you do your research? I tell a good story.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
The 18-year-old soccer sensation igniting worldwide buzz.
How good is this kid? The defenders are just bewitched.
Lamine Yamal.
You ever talk to the soccer ball?
I'm Major Garrett in Washington, inviting you to the takeout. Politics, policy, people, and pop culture served up weeknights. What's on the menu? Plenty. The day's happenings with curiosity, informality, and humor. It's serious discussion, but we do not take ourselves too seriously. Who is a better speaker, Mike Johnson or you? Oh, come on. Join me on the takeout. Streaming right here on CBS News 24/7.
You both had talked about going on Survivor together.
Right. A Survivor contestant believes his sister was murdered.
I'm sorry that I couldn't protect you.
And is determined to be her voice.
This is her speaking to everyone, saying, don't let this happen to you.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Chilling with the queen, her name is Gail King. Hey!
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning. CBS Morning. CBS Morning.
CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus. See you at 7.
CBS Mornings.
I want a mug. Yeah, good mug.
A stalker sends menacing messages to a young mother before she's murdered.
They all just kind of said, I can't believe this happened. He did it. The stalker did it. There's a killer out there, and we're going to go after him.
But the investigation reveals a sinister setup.
I think his head is spinning, thinking about what else are they going to find.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Money Watch is your no-nonsense guide to taking control of your finances, where I offer practical, real-world advice with no jargon and no judgment. I'm Jill Schlesinger. Listen to Money Watch wherever you get your podcasts.
It could be the greatest turnaround in college football history.
What is the magic here?
The undefeated Big Ten champs, Indiana Hoosiers.
CBS Mornings.
CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus. See you at 7.
CBS Mornings.
CBS News 24/7 continuing coverage. You know, today's arraignment and not guilty pleas from Nicolás Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores come after about 48 hours since U.S. Delta forces captured them in that pre-dawn raid Saturday. Shortly after, Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, you see her right there, sworn in as acting leader. Well, President Trump, for his part, warned the interim president would pay a price if she does not cooperate with the United States. Listen.
We're dealing with the people. We're dealing with the people that just got sworn in. And don't ask me who's in charge, because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge.
Have you spoken with her?
We're in charge.
Have you spoken with her?
No, I haven't, but other people have.
Do you want to?
All right, so live to the White House and CBS News senior White House and politics reporter Ed O'Keefe. Ed, the president says we're in charge. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, though, says that the long-term plan wasn't for the U.S. to have any sort of hand in the government there. How do those messages square today?
And adding to that, Reed, a little while ago at the UN in New York, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, told the Security Council in part, quote, "There is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation in furtherance of lawful indictments that have existed for decades. The United States arrested a narco-trafficker who's now going to stand trial in the United States in accordance with the rule of law for the crimes he's committed against our people for 15 years. So Waltz comes out of the Rubio camp, which is this is not a full-blown occupation. We were conducting a limited law enforcement operation, and we'll work with the new Venezuelan leadership to ensure that things go our way. That is different than we're in charge, which is what the president was saying last night on his way back here from Florida, and it's all going to be subject to intense questioning from senior lawmakers when they meet with these senior administration officials, including the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, later today up on Capitol Hill. The leaders of the House and the Senate, the heads of the Intelligence, Armed Services, and Foreign Relations committees in both of those chambers, also set to be part of what's called a classified briefing, but we'll see to what extent we might learn some information shared by Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, the Attorney General Pam Bondi, the CIA Director John Ratcliffe, as we try to get a handle on what exactly is next in terms of U.S. engagement with Venezuela. Obviously, the U.S. Publicly is supportive of Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, who by the Venezuelan government now has been put in charge. But the sort of vague statements on we want control of petroleum, we want to ensure that all these other interests like Hamas or Iran or Russia and China are kicked out of the country. How do you enforce that? How do you oversee that? Who is responsible for that? None of that yet answered by the White House. The president is here working this afternoon. We know he was monitoring the arraignment of Maduro, not necessarily watching coverage because, of course, there was no live coverage of a federal court proceeding. But he is aware of it. He is scheduled to have a meeting in the 3 o'clock Eastern hour with some of his top aides that is the kind of meeting that could suddenly open up to reporters, so we'll see if that happens. And if it does, of course, we'll bring that to you live and see if he provides any more clarity on what exactly is planned next.
Well, as if Venezuela wasn't lead story enough, or what's going on there in the Big Apple relative to Ms. Maduro in court today, there's also recent statements by the president about other nations since carrying out this operation in Venezuela. Talk through what the president's statements have been relative to other territories.
Well, all in the Western Hemisphere. He's talking now about what he calls the Monroe Doctrine, which is his interpretation of the Monroe Doctrine, which, of course, was used to justify U.S. engagement across the Western Hemisphere for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. In this case, he talked or was asked on his flight home from Florida last night specifically about engagement in Colombia, Cuba, Iran, Mexico, and Greenland. On Colombia, he says that country, quote, is very sick too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the U.S. The Colombian leader, quote, is not going to be doing it for very long. Important to point out, President Petro is term limited, and there are elections in Colombia later this year, so there could be new leadership anyway at some point, whether or not the U.S. engages forcefully before then. On Cuba, he says it looks like it's, quote, ready to fail, and that Cuban Americans will be very happy about it. Iran, he says he's watching the situation there very closely. Remember, there have been some protests in recent days and growing intrigue about whether or not this might mean something for the current Iranian regime. The president says that if the Iranians start killing those protesters, they will, quote, be hit very hard by the United States. And when asked about Mexico, If you're concerned about drug trafficking, why not target Mexico? The president said he's repeatedly offered that country's President Claudia Sheinbaum to have U.S. troops go in and help deal with cartels, but that she's been unwilling. Quote, Mexico has to get their act together because they're pouring through Mexico and we're going to have to do something. We'd love Mexico to do it. They're capable of doing it. And then he was asked about Greenland. Remember, even before he took office last year, he was talking about the possibility of a U.S. takeover or at least far larger presence inside Greenland, which is controlled by Denmark. He said, yeah, we're going to need to work on that as well. Important to point out, amid the calls the Secretary of State is making today to foreign counterparts was the foreign minister of the Netherlands, not Denmark, but the Netherlands. And that's a critical kind of temperature taking for the Secretary of State, because there's going to be grave concern now that if he starts talking again about some kind of takeover of Greenland, what that could mean for the relationship with Europe and with NATO, because Denmark is also a NATO member. So if you have two NATO countries potentially in conflict here, what would the rest of the alliance do? So we'll wait and see. But again, he's not backing off any of this. And yet, he has senior national security foreign affairs officials out there suggesting things different than him. Whether that's part of the strategy to keep these adversaries on their toes as the president says things and then other officials wink, nod, and tell everyone it's going to be different, or whether there is indeed some disconnect, is hard to gauge at this point, as many things can be with this administration, because ultimately it settles with the president, and his statement, of course, supersedes anybody else's. But unless or until we see signs of direct U.S. engagement, either diplomatically, commercially, or militarily, it's hard to know what exactly the next steps could be, and we suspect we'll know more later today about whether they were asked and answered that by lawmakers.
And you are in the place to get the answers. Ed O'Keefe, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much. Well, Nicolás Maduro and his wife brought to New York after being captured during that U.S. Special Forces operation Saturday. All of this without involving or notifying members of Congress ahead of time. Well, today, top lawmakers are, as Ed just talked about it, expected to get a briefing from the administration on that operation and, of course, the arrest of the now ousted Venezuelan president. Let's go live now to Capitol Hill and CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, good to see you. So ahead of that briefing, what's been the general reaction so far to the administration keeping Congress out of the loop?
Hey, Reed, it's great to be with you. Well, Congress is coming back into session today. At least the Senate is. The House will return tomorrow. And lawmakers from both parties still have a lot of questions about what the policy is regarding Venezuela. Even those who are supportive of the administration's decision to take Maduro have questions about what comes next. And Reed, you and I were talking before the holiday break about Congress feeling like they weren't getting as much information as they wanted to in regards to Venezuela and those boat strikes. Well, you can imagine now they have even more questions. This is largely, Reed, falling on party lines. You have most Republicans very supportive of the administration and its decision to take Maduro. And on the other hand, you have most Democrats critical of that, questioning a lot of things here. But the bottom line is there are questions that lawmakers have about what comes next. What does U.S. involvement running the country, as the president says, look like? Does that really mean troops on the ground? What does it mean in terms of what Congress can and should authorize or not? So Congress has been left out of the loop here. As you mentioned, Secretary Rubio said that this was a law enforcement operation. But we also heard the president say over the weekend that he was concerned that lawmakers would leak. So there's already been a frustration up here about not getting all of the information that they want to get among lawmakers. Whether today provides any more clarity, we'll wait and see. As Ed alluded to, Secretary Rubio and the president have talked a little bit differently in terms of U.S. involvement and troops on the ground, boots on the ground. So whether they're taking their cues from Rubio, the president, a lot of clarification even among those who are supportive of the overall mission.
Also want to ask you about something that's been circulating up there on Capitol Hill. It's the so-called War Powers Resolution in the Senate. What is it? Yeah. And if it's just a resolution, does it really have any teeth that can be applied to this situation?
Yeah, Reed, to take a step back, I mean, Congress has been ceding its authority when it comes to these kinds of things for a while now, predating Trump. And there has been a small group of lawmakers up here who want to reexert congressional authority when it comes to matters like this and matters of war. And so this resolution in particular, brought about by Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat of Virginia, but also co-sponsored by Senator Rand Paul, notably a Republican from Kentucky. This essentially says there cannot be any further military action in Venezuela without Congress weighing in here. But take a listen to how Tim Kaine described kind of the urgency that he wants to present this.
They need to tell us why it's a smart thing to do. The U.S. invading another nation and knock over its leadership gives a green light to other dictators around the world like Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping to do the same. They need to explain what the purpose is. Is it narco-trafficking efforts, counter efforts? Is it oil? Is it regime change? Is it this bizarre Monroe Doctrine that says we can dominate all nations in the Americas?
So just a little bit of a reality check here. If you remember, back in November, the Senate did take a vote on this War Powers resolution. It only got 2 Republicans to support it, Rand Paul, as I mentioned, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, so it wasn't able to pass. Same situation in the House in December. Only 2 Republicans joined in it, wasn't able to pass. So we'll see. Senator Kaine told CBS Mornings earlier today that he believes these recent events will maybe put the pressure on more lawmakers to join in. But Reed, even if it did pass the Senate and even if it did pass the House, which is a long shot to say the least, it would have to be signed into law by the president, and that is unlikely. So right now, what they are hoping is that this sends some kind of message, but whether this has any teeth, at least at this point, it is unlikely.
Caitlin Huey-Burns following all of it on Capitol Hill. Thank you so much. Good to see you. Well, earlier, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, defended the top secret military operation in Venezuela to the UN General Assembly. Let's listen to some of that defense.
Maduro and his cronies have manipulated Venezuela's electoral system to maintain their illegitimate grip on power. In fact, just 2 years ago in 2024, a UN panel of experts report found that the election in that year was absolutely and completely a farce and fell well short of the most basic transparency and integrity measures essential to upholding credible elections. If the UN and the United Nations in this body confers legitimacy on an illegitimate narco-terrorist and the same treatment in this charter of a democratically elected president or head of state, what kind of organization is this? We should note that over 50 countries, many nations, including the European Union, including a number of Latin American countries in the region, and of course the United States, again, over 50 countries rejected the legitimacy of Maduro's re-election following the disputed 2024 elections and do not recognize him as Venezuela's legitimately elected president. Maduro unlawfully refused to peacefully cede power after the Venezuelan people voted him out of office in the 2024 election. So therefore, Maduro was a fugitive from justice. He is the head of a vicious foreign terrorist organization, Cartel de los Soles. This regime-sponsored enterprise coordinates with and relies on other vicious criminal organizations, namely Tren de Aragua, again, among others, to carry out its objective of using illegal narcotics as a weapon against the United States. And for its part, Tren de Aragua is a designated foreign terrorist organization with thousands of members, many of whom have unlawfully infiltrated the United States and are conducting irregular warfare and undertaking hostile actions against the American people and against the United States. It's terrorizing criminals commit brutal crimes, including murders, kidnappings, extortions, and human, drug, and weapons trafficking. This administration, President Trump, will not stand for it.
Mike Walls speaking there. Of course, we are watching every move for Nicolás Maduro after he was captured, brought out of his own country, and left with no power other than what his attorney has, arguing before a judge in his arraignment. CBS News 24/7 continuing coverage on the capture of now former Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro when we come back.
Chilling with the queen, her name is Gayle King.
Hey!
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning. CBS Morning.
CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus. See you at 7.
CBS Mornings.
I want a mug. Yeah, good mug.
It was almost like being face to face with the devil.
48 hours reports. I fought and fought.
911, what is your emergency?
She disappeared off the face of the earth.
Stream 48 hours, 24/7.
I'm Major Garrett in Washington, inviting you to the takeout. Politics, policy, people, and pop culture served up weeknights. What's on the menu? Plenty. The day's happenings with curiosity, informality, and humor. It's serious discussion, but we do not take ourselves too seriously. Who is a better speaker, Mike Johnson or you? Oh, come on. Join me on the takeout. Streaming right here on CBS News 24/7.
Money Watch is your no-nonsense guide to taking control of your finances, where I offer practical, real-world advice with no jargon and no judgment. I'm Jill Schlesinger. Listen to Money Watch wherever you get your podcasts.
Go to the ends of the earth.
We'll hit the heights.
A great adventure together.
And reach for the stars.
Star power. I like it.
So cool.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Something that's undeniable.
With mindfulness.
Innovative.
Magical.
It's like being a child.
And truly original reporting.
How'd you do your research? I tell a good story.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Why America's last best place is at risk.
If the public land that you use were sold off, could you run your business?
A stalker sends menacing messages to a young mother before she's murdered.
They all just kind of said, I can't believe this happened. He did it. The stalker did it. There's a killer out there, and we're going to go after him.
But the investigation reveals a sinister setup.
I think his head is spinning, thinking about what else are they going to find.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Politics isn't a game. When do consumers actually get to touch and feel a difference in their lives? Politics is about policy. So you would encourage Democrats to work with Donald Trump on an issue like healthcare? I'm a voracious consumer of information, and I'm impatient. I don't like to be spun. Do you know if there are active terror cells in the United States right now? To be moderator of Face the Nation means bringing the most powerful stakeholders to the table to become better informed.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro just pled not guilty in a New York City courtroom days after a U.S. military operation in Venezuela meant he is not the president anymore. He is captured along with his wife, Cilia Flores. Here's a look at some of the charges. The former president and his wife pleading not guilty to drug trafficking and other federal charges. If convicted, the two could spend decades in prison.